Welcome back. A momentous week in politics as Vice President Kamala Harris kicked off her campaign as a presidential candidate right here in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump and state Republicans ramped up their attacks against the VP. CBS 58's AJ Bayatpour sat down with Capitol correspondent Emily Fannin to discuss the latest political news in Wisconsin in this week's Capitol Connection.
We begin this week with a very momentous week in politics. And of course, that has to center around Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the likely presumptive Democratic nominee. Now, she held her first full day campaigning as a presidential candidate here in the battleground state. And she chose West Allis, which is in Milwaukee County, a key area that she knows she has to win. She even emphasized that in her speech. You helped us win in 2020. We're going to need you again in 2024. Some of the things we heard from her, vowing for the first time as a presidential candidate, I will restore reproductive freedoms after the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Also defended her record as a prosecutor and criticized the former president. Now, I think the big topic here, though, is can she close an enthusiasm gap with voters that we know was clearly there when President Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket? And something that was also interesting is that you and I both talked to black voters, another key demographic that both parties are fighting for this election cycle. So, AJ, what are you hearing from black voters on the ground this week? And the question ahead, can she close that enthusiasm gap that was there?
Well, in one of the stories that we did this week, we went ahead and we talked to black voters in a pair of salons in the Uptown District in Milwaukee. We know that black voters and any other voter who turned out at West Allis Central is going to be excited because that's why they're at the vice president's rally. But as far as your everyday voters who aren't going to campaign events, what do they think? Mixed response. There are some folks who we talked to who are very excited. They love the idea of being able to cast a ballot and help elect the first female president, the first female of color to serve as president of the United States. Other folks are kind of jaded. They voted for President Obama twice. I talked to one business owner who did so and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And now her attitude is, neither administration really did enough, in my view, to help me or my business. I plan on sitting out this election as I did in 2020. Are there a lot of voters like that? The big question within Milwaukee and Milwaukee County is that same level of energy that former President Obama had in 2008, 2012 gonna transfer to Vice President Harris? You know, we crunched the numbers going back to 2000, former President Obama, the only Democratic candidate, the only candidate overall, of course, to get 200,000 votes to reach that number in the city of Milwaukee. President Biden came close at 198,000, probably because of that connection as former President Obama's vice president for those 8 years. Does that same energy or more so transfer onto Vice President Harris? That's something that we're going to be tracking come election night.
And coming from the Republican side, too, of course, there was many Wisconsin Republicans that were quick to criticize Vice President Kamala Harris, labeling her as more liberal than Joe Biden. Also heard the former President Donald Trump back on the campaign trail with his running mate J.D. Vance, really hitting her hard on the economy and border issues. That's what I think is going to come down to this, too, is this now is going to be her problems, right? Everyone blamed President Biden for inflation. My wallet's not going good. Pocketbook issues, things like that. Whether the border, I don't think there's going to be a solution anytime soon to this, but how she responds to those attacks is what's going to be interesting watching in the next 4 months here.
Right. You know, we've seen a lot of national outlets issue corrections, so to speak, saying, no, Vice President Harris was never the border czar. That may be true, but the reality is there was a time early in the Biden administration where she was publicly named by the president as a point person of sorts. And early on in the administration, all the way heck up until just last December, there were record migrant encounters at the southern border. That is something that Vice President Harris is going to have to reckon with. But a response to Republican criticism would be right now, we've seen 2 straight months for May and June. The Border Patrol data show that for those last 2 months, the number of migrant encounters were the fewest of any of the last 4 years in those months of May and June, comparing to the first 3 years, those months under the Biden administration. So there is not that same level of traffic right now. Does that remain something in turn that resonates with voters? We'll see. On the economy, we know that Marquette is out in the field with a poll. spoiler alert, it's going to be close between Harris and Trump. But within that, the poll asks, hey, who do you think would do a better job on the economy? Who would do a better job on the border? Up until now, when it was Trump-Biden, Wisconsin voters were overwhelmingly saying we think Trump is better on the border and the economy. Does that same dynamic play out with Harris? Or does that shift a little bit? That's going to be something that's worth watching very closely.
Right, because not even polls in Wisconsin, but nationally, the top three issues: economy, inflation, and border. But when you're polling Democrats, of course, the abortion issue is more up to the top of issues that they are really concerned about in this next election cycle. That is something also that I'm really curious to see how well Harris does with reproductive rights. We know she had a tour that was launched actually here in Wisconsin. It was a nationwide tour focusing on the issue of abortion and trying to restore that if she and Joe Biden were elected. Well, now she's top of the ticket. Is that going to resonate with the suburban moms? Another key voter demographic in the WOW counties is something that, you know, when we get out in the field and talking to more voters to see if that can be a winning issue. Now, looking ahead to next week, moving on from the presidential race, is a lawsuit that we will hear from on Monday that could create some headaches from our election officials. And this has to do with a Marion County judge is going to be ruling on absentee ballot envelope applications. Now, right now, when you get your absentee ballot, the application is already on there. This lawsuit is challenging it to have that separate. Now, if you do that, there's always costs involved, and that's a lot more paper and paper trail that clerks are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, basically the question here is this judge going to side with the challengers and say, yeah, I agree with your interpretation of state law that these have to be separate forms. You can't print the absentee application on the envelope, as has been the case for recent elections in Wisconsin. But beyond that, even if the judge does side with that ruling, would he order that that change be made for the November election? That's what would really create those headaches for clerks if they have to run out and get all these new application forms. Or would the judge say, we'll keep it how it is, I'll stay the ruling. We can keep this process in effect, because it's going to be challenged then. If that does happen, there would be challenges, and while all that plays out, we'll keep the system in place so that we're not having clerks uncertain of whether they have to go out and try to order a bunch of new forms.
And by the way, there's already absentee ballots out right now for the August primary. All right, we'll keep an eye on that case, and thanks so much for joining us this week.